There's a good chance a woman has already tried to get your attention, not with a compliment, not with a touch, but with a question. And the reason you may not have noticed is not because you were inattentive. It is because the signal was designed to be deniable. Not deceptive, deniable. There is a difference, and that difference is actually the entire key to understanding how this works. Women who feel attracted to a man rarely announce it directly. Not because they are playing games, but because they are managing risk. A direct expression of interest is a visible vulnerability. A question, on the other hand, costs nothing if it is not received. It can be walked back. It can be explained away. It leaves her dignity intact. So she uses questions. And because the questions look ordinary, because they sound like small talk, like politeness, like passing conversation, you have almost certainly answered them, moved on, and never once realized what was actually being offered to you in that moment. That is what this video is going to change. By the time we reach the end, you will be able to hear a question differently. Not all questions, but specific ones. You will know which ones are contact-seeking rather than information-seeking. And more importantly, you will know what she is actually waiting for when she asks. Before we get to the questions themselves, you need to understand one thing, because without it, everything else will still look like coincidence. Women have a fundamentally different relationship with the cost of rejection than men do. Not because they are more fragile, but because the social consequences of visible rejection operate differently for them, particularly at this stage of life. A man who expresses interest and is turned down loses something privately. A woman who expresses interest visibly and is turned down loses something publicly. Her moment of vulnerability becomes a shared memory between two people, and in social circles, in workplaces, in the kind of overlapping lives that men in their 40s and 50s tend to inhabit, that cost can feel very high. Psychologists who study what is called approach avoidance behavior, the internal tension between wanting to move towards something and fearing the consequences of doing so, consistently find that women in established social environments are significantly more likely to use indirect signals than direct ones. Not because indirection is dishonest, but because indirection is protective. Think about what that actually means for you. It means that when a woman in your life is interested, she is almost certainly not going to say so. She is going to find another way to open the door. A way that, if you do not walk through it, she can close quietly behind her and pretend it was never open. Of course, this does not mean every woman behaves this way in every situation. Context matters enormously. A woman who is highly confident or who is operating in a lower stakes environment may be more direct. But for the large majority of the interactions you are having right now, in your daily life, with the women around you, the pattern holds. She does not tell you. She asks. Understanding that is not optional. It is the foundation. Once you accept that indirection is not confusion, but strategy, everything that follows will make immediate sense. Because knowing the category is useful. But what really changes things is learning to read what is underneath the question, not just the question itself. The first category of questions you need to know is the one that sounds the most ordinary. Because that is exactly the point. There is a specific type of question where the information being requested is completely irrelevant to the person asking. She already has an opinion. She does not actually need a recommendation. She could find the answer herself in 30 seconds. But she asks you anyway, and the asking is the entire point. Behavioral researchers who study conversational patterns in early-stage attraction have identified what they call pretextual inquiry. Questions that appear to be information-seeking, but are functionally contact-seeking. The question is not a request. It is an opening. It is a way of entering your space, holding your attention for a moment, and watching how you respond without the vulnerability of saying something explicit. You have seen this. She asks which of two options you would choose when she clearly already has a preference. She asks for a restaurant recommendation even though she eats at the same 3 places every week. She asks your opinion on a decision that is already made. The information she receives from your answer matters far less than the exchange itself. The moment of shared attention, the reason to be looking at you, the excuse to hear your voice. Now, you might be thinking, could this not just be friendly conversation? Could she not simply be filling silence or being sociable? And yes, sometimes that is exactly what it is. But here's what separates ordinary friendliness from these contact-seeking questions: frequency, context, and direction. A woman making small talk will distribute it broadly to whoever is nearby. A woman who is using questions to create contact will direct her questions at you specifically, even when others are present. She crosses the room. She waits until you are free. She finds the moment. That is not coincidence. What most men do when they receive this kind of question is answer it, fully, helpfully, and then consider the exchange finished. They give her the information she technically asked for and close the loop she was trying to open. She walks away with a recommendation she did not need and a conversation that ended before it started. The question was a door. You walked past it looking for a sign on the door. Knowing the category is useful, but what really changes things is learning to read what is underneath the question, not just the question itself. Two women can ask you the exact same question, and one of them is flirting, and one of them genuinely just wants to know. The words are identical. The signal is completely different. And the difference is not in what she says. It is in everything that surrounds the saying of it. When attraction is present, women exhibit what researchers call attentional anchoring, an involuntary increase in focused attention toward the person they find emotionally significant. You do not need to know the term. What you need to know is what it looks like in a real conversation. She asks the question and then she waits. Not impatiently, genuinely. There's a quality of stillness in her attention after she asks that is different from polite listening. Her eyes stay with you a half-second longer than the question requires. If she is standing near you, she does not shift her weight or glance around. She holds. Her body is oriented toward you fully, not partially. And when you begin to answer, she does not look away first. There are other details. A smile that appears slightly before your answer rather than in response to it. That small anticipatory warmth that suggests she already finds the interaction pleasant before you have said a word. A slight tilt of her head that signals genuine processing, not social performance. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, a brief moment where she holds the question in the air between you, as if she is in no hurry to receive the answer and every interest in extending the moment. Of course, any single one of these details in isolation means very little. Nervous people hold still. Attentive people maintain eye contact. One instance of any of this is not a signal. It is a data point. What matters is whether these details appear together, consistently, specifically around you. Most men register none of this, not because they are not observant in other areas of life, but because no one ever told them this was something worth observing. They process the question. They miss the conversation happening around it. But there is a second type of question that goes further, and it is the one most men find most confusing. There is a specific kind of question that, when a woman asks it, she is not just making conversation, she is deciding something. Questions about a man's personal history, his past, his story, who he was before she knew him, are among the most significant signals a woman can send, and they are almost always disguised as casual interest. Women invest emotionally before they invest verbally. This is a well-documented pattern in how female attraction develops. Before a woman expresses anything directly, she has already spent considerable mental energy constructing a picture of the person she is drawn to. Questions about his past are part of that construction. She is not asking because she is curious, the way a journalist is curious. She is asking because she is building something, a version of him that she intends to keep thinking about. So when she asks what you were like when you were younger, she is not making small talk. When she asks what you are most proud of, not professionally but personally, she is not networking. When she asks about a relationship from your past in a way that is gentle rather than probing, she is trying to understand the shape of you. What separates these questions from polite curiosity is the follow-up. A woman who is genuinely interested will remember what you say, not just in the moment. She will reference it later. In a conversation a week after, she will return to something you mentioned briefly, something that most people would have forgotten, and she will ask about it again. That is not coincidence. That is evidence that the original conversation went somewhere in her mind after it ended. Think back to a conversation that once seemed ordinary. One where you walked away without realizing what had actually just happened. Most men in this situation do something that quietly closes the door. They answer the question about themselves and immediately redirect the conversation, either back to a neutral topic or by asking the same question in return as if it were a social obligation. Both responses signal that the level of intimacy she was opening toward is not one you registered. She notices. She does not usually say so, but here's the thing. All of this assumes the questions are coming from a stranger or someone new. What about the woman who is already in your life? Most of what we have covered so far assumes she is someone new. But the woman most likely to be doing this is probably someone you already know. This is the part that most videos on this topic skip entirely. The assumption is always that attraction signals occur in early interactions with unfamiliar people in explicitly social settings. But for men in their 40s and 50s, the reality is different. Your daily life is largely populated by people you already know. Colleagues, neighbors, women in your regular social circle, familiar faces in recurring environments. And it is in exactly these contexts that the question as signal pattern becomes most active and most overlooked. A woman who already knows you does not need to ask about your job. She knows it. She does not need to ask how your weekend was in any genuine informational sense, but she asks anyway. Because the question is not about the information. The question is about reestablishing a specific kind of contact. It is about stepping briefly into a slightly warmer register than casual familiarity and watching whether you meet her there. Pay particular attention to questions that have no logical reason to be directed at you specifically. She could ask anyone. She asks you. That choice, the direction of her inquiry, is itself the signal. And notice the pattern over time. A woman who is interested in a man she already knows will revisit his details. She will ask about something he mentioned in passing weeks ago, something minor enough that most people would not retain it. That retention is intentional, even when it is not consciously so. It means she was still thinking about him after that conversation ended, and she is now using his own words as a way to re-enter his attention. Remember what I said at the start? That women are using questions as low-risk contact signals in ways that leave them protected if the interest is not returned? In an existing relationship, that protection becomes even more important. The stakes are higher. The visibility is greater. So the signals become quieter, more embedded in ordinary conversation, easier to miss. And what is the one question type that almost no man ever reads correctly? This last category is the one I want you to pay the most attention to, because it is the one that genuinely looks like the opposite of what it is. Most men, when they think about attraction signals, imagine warmth, softness, obvious friendliness. They are looking for the smile, the compliment, the open body language. And then a woman challenges something they said, questions a choice they made, or gently pushes back on their opinion. And those men read it as disinterest, as disagreement, sometimes even as dismissal. That reading is often completely wrong. Here is the psychological reality. Challenging someone requires investment. It requires that you care enough about the person to engage with their perspective rather than simply accept it and move on. Genuine indifference is actually the most efficient behavior. You nod, you let it pass, you redirect to something you care about. When a woman takes the time to question your opinion, to playfully argue your position, to notice what you chose and ask why, that is not detachment. That is attention. And attention, directed consistently at one person in particular, is the foundation of attraction. What researchers call evaluative engagement, the act of examining and questioning rather than passively receiving, is a well-documented pattern in how women test the quality of a potential connection. She is not trying to win the argument. She is trying to see how you hold your ground, how you engage with pushback, whether you are interesting when challenged or whether you fold immediately or become defensive. You might be wondering, how do you tell the difference between a woman who is attracted to you and a woman who simply disagrees with everything you say? And it is a fair question. The difference is in the emotional register and in the pattern. A woman who challenges you with warmth in her eyes, who stays in the conversation after you push back, who smiles slightly when you hold your position. That is not conflict. That is interest wearing a very effective disguise. The other signal in this category is simpler, but equally misread. She asks whether you are seeing anyone. She frames it as casual curiosity, drops it into a conversation about something else entirely, listens to your answer very carefully, and then moves on as if it was not important. You may have answered this question from a woman and thought nothing of it at the time. The question itself is ordinary. What is not ordinary is the quality of her attention when you answer it. The slight change in her expression, the pause before she responds, the particular direction the conversation takes afterward. She already knows what she wanted to know, and now you do too. Here is what all of these questions have in common, and it is simpler than you might expect. In every single one of the patterns we have walked through today, the question is not the thing. The question is the vehicle. What she is actually sending is a signal of continued interest, a way of saying, without saying, that she wants more of your attention than you have offered, and she is creating the conditions for you to offer it. What she is waiting for is not a correct answer. She already knows you can answer questions. She is waiting to see whether you stay in the conversation, whether you slow down enough to be genuinely present in the exchange, whether you give something back that signals you noticed, not that you noticed her question, but that you noticed her. Most men answer and move on. They treat every question as a transaction, and every transaction as complete once the information has been exchanged. The woman who asked has now received her answer, and the interaction is finished. He is already thinking about the next thing. She was offering him the beginning of a conversation. He gave her the end of one. That is the moment most men walk away from without realizing it. Everything we have covered today points to a single truth about how women communicate attraction. And that truth is this: the content of what she says is almost never the message. The message is in the choice to engage, in the direction of her attention, in what she remembers and returns to, in the energy she brings to an interaction that, on the surface, looks completely ordinary. You now have something most men in your position do not have. You have a framework for hearing what is actually being said. Not as a manipulation tactic, not as a game, but simply as a more accurate way of reading what is already happening around you. And the best part is this: you do not need to analyze every conversation, examine every question, or turn social interactions into a puzzle to be solved. Once you understand the pattern, you begin to feel it rather than calculate it. It becomes intuitive. A certain kind of question from a certain kind of woman in a certain context starts to land differently, and you will know. Trust that. What I want to know is whether any of this is already familiar to you. Has a woman ever asked you one of these questions? And looking back now, do you think she was trying to get your attention? Tell me what happened in the comments. I read every comment on this channel, and those real stories are often the most valuable thing in the conversation. If what we covered today was useful, there is more of this kind of content here, and subscribing means you will not miss what comes next. Because on this channel, we go deeper than surface behavior. We look at the psychology underneath. And in the next video, I am going to show you exactly what to say and what not to say when you recognize one of these questions coming, because getting this far is only half of it.